Behind the Bedroom Wall, Chapter 14. As soon as the sky turned dark, the Gestapo came. This time they didn't bother knocking on the door, they just broke the lock and stomped right in. Corinna tried to swallow past the lump of fear that closed her throat, but it was impossible. She saw that one of the officers was Hans Damaru. Oh, how she despised him for hitting her father. She couldn't believe she had ever looked up to him. This time there were 4 men. They started in the front room and destroyed it. They knocked holes in the walls and ripped open the sofas and pulled up floorboards. The only thing they didn't touch was the framed picture of Adolf Hitler hanging above the ruined couch. Turning on every light, they worked their way through the kitchen. Again, they destroyed everything. Corinna's father had warned her and her mother not to say anything when the Gestapo was here, no matter what they did. And Corinna could see her mother biting her lip until she drew blood. Corinna could taste the metallic tang of fear in her own mouth. The Reams followed the officers upstairs. There was barely enough room for the 3 of them, with the 4 men tossing things about. They started in Corinna's parents' bedroom. First, the bed was ripped open, and the feathers danced merrily around the room, oblivious to the seriousness of the situation. Then their wardrobe was dismantled with an axe, as were the chair and Erling's desk, which had been in the family for 3 generations. It was priceless. Now it was worthless. Corinna watched everything as if she were watching a play. She felt involved, yet somehow removed. She felt angry, yet on the verge of hysterical laughter. This was not happening to her or her family. How could it be? They were good, loyal Germans. They loved their fatherland, didn't they? They wanted Germany to prosper and succeed, didn't they? What more was needed? Only that they had to hate Jews, love their Fuhrer, and obey the party at all costs. Not too much. Maybe she could convince her parents before it was too late, she thought frantically. She could convince Hans it had all been a mistake. Her parents weren't traitors, they were just ignorant. They didn't know better. She knew she could explain everything. Hans would understand. After all, he was her best friend's brother. Hans, she cried. Corinna, silence, her father commanded. Her mother put a firm arm around her and said quietly, "Hush, Liebling, it'll be over soon. Hush." Corinna could feel her mother's arm shake and it flow through her own body until she could feel her legs quiver with fear. What had she almost done? She had almost ruined everything. She had almost turned in her parents. Her legs trembled uncontrollably. 2 officers were now in the bathroom. She heard a grating noise and then the sound of water flowing. As her mother led her into her bedroom behind Hans and one of the other officers, she saw a flood of water flowing out of the bathroom. Their house would be ruined. Her bedroom received the same treatment as her parents' room had, only the picture of the Fuhrer above her desk remained untouched. They destroyed the wardrobe, but still the back of it stayed in place over the damning hole in the wall. Hans lifted the axe one last time. "Stop," Erem said. Hans turned to look at Corinna's father. "I thought you learned your lesson last time," he said viciously, "but I guess I was wrong," he added as he nodded to one of the other officers. The other officer grabbed Erem from behind and pinned his arms behind his back. Third officer punched Corinna's father in the stomach, just below the ribs, leaving him gasping for breath. "Stop it!" Corinna cried. "Leave him alone." "Get back there," Hans said, easily pushing Corinna back into the corner of the room. "Don't interfere," he said menacingly. Again, he lifted the axe and it came down hard, splintering the back of the wardrobe. The axe came down again and the back of the wardrobe fell away in 2 parts, exposing the hole in the wall. "Lights, quickly," Hans demanded, obviously in charge of this search. Another officer stepped forward with 2 flashlights, which they swung around the hidden room. Corinna looked at her father. He sat on the floor, breathing normally now. Her mother squatted next to him. Both of their faces were white and pinched with fear. Corinna knew they expected to be arrested at any moment. She looked back at Hans, who was now partially in the hidden room. All she could see of him were his shiny leather boots and the gleaming pistol attached around his waist. She swallowed nervously. If her plan didn't work, she wondered if they would be shot on the spot. Hans poked his head back out. "What is this room?" he demanded. "It's no use," said Corinna's father, sighing wearily. He started to say more, but his daughter interrupted. "It's my room," Corinna said, sounding more brazen than she felt. All the eyes turned to her. "I use it as a kind of a secret clubhouse." "Corinna, what are you talking about?" her mother cried shrilly. She turned to her mother. "I never told you to about it because I thought you might not like how involved I am in the new model. You always say I have to spend more time on my homework," she said, hoping she sounded disdainful. She turned back to Hans. "I keep all my party material back there, and when my parents think I'm studying, I go back there." Hans' eyes narrowed. "How did you bolt the wardrobe to the wall?" Corinna tried to shrug with what she hoped looked like nonchalance. I just did. I used screws and hinges. I did it one day when no one was home. Hans narrowed his eyes. It's not easy to drill holes in the wall. I'm strong, Corinna countered. Didn't Rita tell you that I'm the strongest girl in our Hugh model? I can run the fastest, too. Strong enough to move the wardrobe? Corinna waved her hand, hoping Hans wouldn't notice that it trembled slightly. I first took out all the drawers in my clothes. It wasn't so heavy after that. Hans glared at her before looking in the small room again. Corinna knew he saw all the pamphlets she had spread around the space and the clippings she had saved of the Führer she had pinned to the walls. She had even piled the Krugman's blankets and mattresses on top of each other and covered them with a small woven rug to make the room more appealing. She wanted to convince anyone who found it that it was a comfortable place to be. Only a very loyal German would create such a shrine to the National Socialist Party. This is a trick! Corinna's heart jumped into her mouth. Why didn't Hans believe her? Corinna, how could you? Demanded her mother, wiping her eyes. We always thought you were studying. We didn't want to keep you from your interest in the party. We too love the party. But how will you pass your classes if you don't study? I did study, she said, trying to sound sullen. I just wanted a place to pin all my clippings. You said it would ruin the walls if I pinned them out here. Corinna, her father said sternly, you've disobeyed us. You will have to be punished. But enough, Hans shouted. He stood up, looking uncertainly at Corinna for a brief moment. Then he quickly put on a fierce scowl. I have information. Corinna didn't like the triumphant sound she heard in his voice. She watched as he extracted a black book from his jacket pocket. Her black book. Only one person could have gotten that black book and given it to Hans, her best friend. She felt dizzy staring up at Hans. Now she would surely be shot as a traitor. No more would she walk through the beautiful countryside. No more would she smell the sweet flowers of spring. No more would she feel the bite of the cold winter wind. No more would she hug her mother and answer me. Corinna looked up at Hans through a rosy haze. Maybe she was dying already. Why did you tear out a page in this book? Hans demanded. Then she remembered she had torn out the page. Those awful 5 words, my parents are the enemy. Rita had read those words, but she had no proof. I made a drawing I didn't like and I ripped the page out. I threw it away. Hans sneered at her. You lie. You wrote that your parents were traitors, Jew lovers, scum. Why didn't you turn them in? That's not true, Corinna cried. It was a drawing of my cat. Hans stared furiously down at Corinna, and then his eyes shifted to her parents. I don't believe this, he stormed. I don't believe any of this. He stomped his boot on the wooden floor in his anger. I will find the truth, and then you will be sent to prison. I'll make sure you never get out. He turned to his fellow officers. Come, he commanded, his voice taut with anger and suppressed violence. Just at that moment, Tag pranced into the room, and one of the officers nearly tripped over her. Hans glared at the tiny kitten. Before Corinna realized what was about to happen, he aimed his shiny boot at the animal and viciously kicked out at Tag. The kitten jumped aside at the last second. Corinna cried out. Images of Herr Oss came suddenly into her mind. She had stood and watched him get kicked and beaten, but this time she would stop the brutality. She tried to move, but it was too late. Hans kicked at the kitten a second time. This time his boot connected, leaving the animal lying on her side, unmoving. Hans waved the other officers out, and they preceded him through the bedroom door. Hans stopped and turned in the doorway to glare back at the Reims. I smell Jews, he said viciously. I smell their dirty, rotten stink, and when I find them, they'll lead me right back to you. All right, your turn. Answers in complete sentences. How would you feel if this destruction happened to you and your family? Number 2, what did Corinna do to try to save her family? Number 3, what do you think will happen next?